for our increasingly elderly population. And a note has just popped up, so everyone knows the meeting is being recorded, and obviously the purpose of that is to ease minute taking and to follow up on any important issues that do arise. So welcome to all those parliamentarians attending and to our many guests. In a couple of minutes' time, we will hear from Housing Minister Chris Pincher, but I think in the first instance, we need to just deal with the formalities of our AGM. So if we could quickly do that, and I will, in the first instance, just hand over to Lord Best.
Well, my pleasant duty is to propose Peter Aldous MP as chair of the All Party Parliamentary Group. If we can do that, we can do all kinds of other business. But could I ask the parliamentarians whether they're agreeable to that, if they would signal accordingly?
Yes, indeed.
Thank you very much. Agreed, nem con.
Right. And I should hasten to add, Richard sort of slightly underestimated himself. He is very much a co-chair, and if there is such a thing as a lead co-chair, it is him, and I have no problem in sort of paying second role to him in this particular area. And on that note, if I could propose Richard as the co-chair. And are those parliamentarians on the call happy with that proposal?
I'm very happy with that proposal.
That is excellent. And assuming that there is no dissenting voice, therefore Richard is re-elected as co-chair. We then move on to the re-electing the vice chairs, and we have 4 vice chairs: Baroness Andrews, Baroness Barker, Ruth Cadbury MP, and Lord Stoneham. And I would propose that they are all re-elected en bloc. I would just add, if there are any other parliamentarians who are very keen to sort of join us as co-chairs, we would be absolutely delighted for them to do so. Yes, and so can I have that's the proposal. Can I have a seconder or any other suggestions? And I see that Sally Greengross, boss, has just said she would like to be a vice chair as well. I think that is an excellent idea, and I personally would welcome her expertise and knowledge on the subject. So with those 5 vice chairs, is everyone happy with that?
Delighted. Right,
that's that part of the AGM continued. The final part of the AGM is just to note the Secretariat and finance arrangements for the group. Housing 21 provide support the Secretariat, which is provided by Lord Best's parliamentary assistant, and also administrative support and arrangements are provided by the Peabody Trust. Early this year, or end of last year and this year, we carried out our report into housing to those living with dementia, and this was organised by the Housing Lin and funded by Anchor Housing. And I think thanks also due to Housing 21, Peabody and Anchor Hanover for their help, and to the Housing Lin for the excellent work that they did in pulling together our recent inquiry. So we just need to record those particular, as I said, that's that support that we do receive, and that is put in the return that we make to the House, the parliamentary body who oversees APPGs. Anyway, that is the formal part of the meeting completed, and we now move on probably to the more exciting, interesting 2 component parts, and the first of which is we are going to hear from the Housing Minister, the Right Honourable Chris Pincher, who is going to speak to us for about 15 minutes. Chris, just by way of background, he's been in Parliament. He came in at the same time as myself in 2010, and since February 2020, he has been Minister of State for Housing. He's concentrating on specific areas of which are specific focus: planning reform, which is getting quite a lot of discussion at the moment, supporting the housing market, which has obviously been vital as we come through COVID and out on the other side, and also home ownership as well. And so it is great that Chris can join us. And as I said, he's going to speak to us for about 15 minutes about the challenges that housing and care for older people face. And then he will open up to Q&A. So, Chris, I'm assuming you're there somewhere. Welcome, and over to you.
Well, thanks very much, Peter. Yes, I am out here somewhere. Congratulations to you, first of all, and also to Richard on your re-election as co-chairs of the All Party Group. I am a great fan and believer of APPGs. I think they are very useful mechanisms to question government, to prod ministers with ideas or with questions. So I do encourage them. I encourage you, and I'm always very happy to come back relatively frequently to join you in your discussions. I'm not going to speak for too long because I think it's probably more beneficial for your members to ask me questions rather than have me talk at you for a long period of time. But let me just say 4 things to begin. My key focus at the moment, as you can probably imagine, is the flagship legislative item mentioned in the Queen's speech, which is our planning reform legislation, which we'll introduce later this year. What we're trying to achieve through that legislation is to make the planning system, which, love it or hate it, I think most people will agree, is a rather complicated, indeed Byzantine and slow-moving beast. And we want it to be a much more transparent, much more speedy, much more navigable, much more engaging, and thereby much more predictable system, which will enable more people to get involved in planning and will certainly help more developers, particularly SMEs, to better understand what they have to do to develop, and for more communities to have a greater say in what is developed around them. We've also introduced a number of permitted development right changes with key prior approvals to give local authorities controls, which I think will help develop our town centres and more urban spaces and make more residential accommodation available. And some of that accommodation, I think, will speak to the later living audience. 3 further things before I turn back to you to take some of your questions. The first is, I have always been and continue to be particularly interested in older people's living and social care. We all know that in the next 20 or 30 years or so, the number of people over 85 is going to double in our country from something like 1.5 million to over 3 million. And that means we need to take older persons living and social care really very seriously. And that's why I've been keen with the Department for Health and Social Care to focus on what we can do to encourage the sector to develop. And we are going to, we're putting the final touches to a task force which will focus upon the barriers in the sector to entry, the challenges with developing more appropriate accommodation, the challenges that exist on the demand side, why people don't necessarily move as they might, and the benefits, looking at international comparators of the sector in terms of both economics and health. So we'll be doing that, and we'll be making some further announcements soon. In the meantime, the Affordable Homes Programme that we launched for 2021-2026 has as a key component of it a requirement that strategic partners that work with us to take up the £12.3 billion that we've made available for new housing over the next 5 years. That 10% of it must be for adaptable living purposes. So people with disabilities, people who are older, can benefit from that extra AHP development inbuilt to the funding that we have made available. One final point before I turn back to you. You'll know that we've also consulted on changes to Part M of building regulations. I think from memory.
Oh, we lost you.
We
there.
appear to have lost the minister.
I'll just drop out there.
Yes, you're back.
I don't know at what point I dropped out, so I'll rather than rewind, I'll just continue. Then you can ask me some questions. So I was saying that we're consulting. We consulted at the end of last year on changes to Part M of building regulations and whether we need to mandate stronger rules around accessibility. So specific designs, for example, to allow wheelchair access to ground floors and the like. We are just wrapping up that review of the consultation. So I hope at our next meeting, I'll be able to say something more about where we're going to land on building regulations and Part M and the changes that we're making as a wider set of changes to building regulations. So in conclusion, Peter and Richard, before I hand back to you, I'm very keen on what APPGs can achieve. I'm particularly keen on this sector, its importance socially in terms of health and in terms of economics. And I look forward to working with you to making sure that there are better outcomes for older people in terms of their housing and their social care. And I trust that we are going to have an interesting discussion now.
Very many thanks for that, for setting out the scene so well. And I will now hand over to Richard to chair the Q&A session. Richard, over to you.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you very much indeed, Minister. Chris, that was really helpful, much appreciated. And we will now, if we may, grill you with some hopefully tough, penetrating questions.
Right.
We've had a couple of people who've already put in bids to put points to you. So I'm going to call upon those in a moment. Henry Smith from the Centre for Ageing Better and Michael Voges from ARCO, the Association of Retirement Community Operators. They're going to put their points in just a moment. If I could just go first and say, your words were words of encouragement, and they are appreciated. The amount of new build, purpose-built housing for older people is at a very low ebb at the moment, despite, as we all know, the huge demographic change and the much larger proportion of the population who are now older people. And you made the point that 10% of the Affordable Homes Programme is to be allocated by Homes England and the GLA to specialist housing of all sorts, which embraces housing for older people. But there are other demands, and you mentioned people with disabilities of different kinds, maybe younger people. This does squeeze down the amount of funding available specifically for purpose-built housing that is tailor-made for older people. I wonder whether we are down to, we're down to the small percentages of the total program, despite the fact that if we do more homes that are really age-friendly and do house older people, we get 2 for 1 because they're going to move out of somewhere else. no doubt a family home somewhere. They may move out of social renting, out of council housing. They will free up a home for a whole family. So although accommodation is more expensive to build, not least because of the, as you were saying, the need for accessibility, communal facilities, common rooms and so on, nice bit of garden for everybody. There's some extra costs involved, but you get 2 for 1 and you get these huge savings to the health and social care budgets of people having much more satisfactory, manageable, warm homes in an older age. So Chris, I'm making the point, how can we do rather better than the very small percentage at the moment of this important program out there going to people who are older?
Well, I think you're right, Richard. If you look at the statistics, which I think are accurate, which show that in every time an older person moves into a more appropriate property, 2 in every 3 moves free up a first-time buyer property 2 or maybe 3 stages back down the property chain. So getting the middle of the market moving is hugely important to getting people onto the property ladder. And it also is hugely important to people's older people's health outcomes. So that's why I'm very keen that we work closely with DHSC. I've had a number of useful conversations with Helen Balles. She's also bought into this as the social care minister. And I think that will enable us to, with the help of, I suspect, many people on this call, identify where the barriers are, both in terms of supply, what needs to be done to help the sector grow, and in terms of demand, what we need to do to create a more encouraging environment for older people to make the move. And that detail that we'll be able to draw upon will be useful to us. And I'm going to put this as carefully as I can. It will be useful to us in our discussions with other government departments, including one very important government department, which tends to keep its hands on the purse strings of the nation's finances.
Understood. Thank you very, very much. Now, can I bring in Henry Smith, first of all, from the Centre for Aging Better? Henry, can you be switched on for us? Oh, no sign of Henry. Could I ask people if they would to put a question into the Q&A box, and I'll draw on that to put more questions to the Minister. But are we without access to Henry from Aging Better? If so, I will move on to Michael Voges from ARCO. Michael.
I'm going to try. Can you hear me, Richard?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh,
please
very
come
good.
in.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for taking my question. And I would like to say, Minister, thank you very much for your contribution. And we're obviously very pleased to hear that you and your colleagues are looking into this very closely. And I suppose, apart from a question on timings on when we might be able to discuss, expect the announcement, I suppose really a question as to the scale of the ambition of this task force and your work in this, because I think you'll be aware that we recently wrote to the Prime Minister, including with some of the parliamentarians here on the call today, but also Age UK, academics and the like, saying that the 2020s really need to be the decade of housing with care, just like the 90s were the decades of care homes expansion, and the noughties were the expansion of the domiciliary care market. So in terms of will this task force tackle, I suppose, some of the smaller issues, or is the ambition really to make the UK a world leader in the provision of housing and care options for older people? That would be my question.
Well, thanks, Michael. I think we want to be really ambitious. I mean, if we recognise that, as I say, the opportunity of moving a significant number of people in accommodation that probably isn't appropriate for them anymore, in places that's not really appropriate for them, to better accommodation, which is maybe closer to service centres, town centres, for example, where transport systems are much easier to use. You have all sorts of beneficial effects. You have property being used in places, town centres, for example, where it presently isn't. The services which currently are in those centres will be used more by the people living near to those centres and make those more economically viable. It reduces the need for road use because people are living closer to services. So there are those benefits as well. And then, as I say, further back down the chain, you are freeing up quite a significant amount of property, which then allows first-time buyers to get onto the property ladder. So I think we want to be really quite ambitious. That's one of the reasons why we've partnered with DHSC to make the case for a better, more systematic approach to older persons living. And that's why I think the task force will be realistic in what it's focusing on. You know, we're not trying to come up with fiscal opportunities. That's the job of the Treasury, but we're looking at barriers to entry, barriers to demand, looking at international regulatory comparisons to see how we can really make this sector expand and expand rapidly to deal with the challenge of what's going to be a doubling in the number of quite elderly people in a relatively short space of time. So we want to be very ambitious. And you asked me what the timescale is. Let me put it like this. Why don't we have another all-party group meeting in the autumn, by which point I should be able to say a little bit more.
Many thanks for that. Could I ask whether any of my parliamentary colleagues would like to ask a question? Any vice chairs, of which you are several, who'd like to put a question to the minister? Could you?
His hand is up, Richard.
Thank you.
Shall I chip in, Richard?
Please come in, Kay, if you would.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Minister. Thank you so much for coming. I've got a couple of questions, actually. First of all, on the planning bill, and it's a more general question. You talked about it being more transparent and speedy and predictable.
Mm-hmm.
But if consultation is limited to the first stage of development, how do you think the bill is actually going to incentivize local authorities and developers to plan for older people housing, whether we're talking about specialized housing or ensuring that older people get a part of the housing market, which is essentially appropriate for them? Because a lot of the decisions which make the final disposition of both types of housing and quality of housing are made at the second stage. That's my first question.
Mm-hmm.
Something which will exercise us a lot, I think, in the House of Lords.
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, can I ask a specific question about permitted development rights? There has been significant expansion. It means essentially that local authorities do not have to abide by local or national plans. So they don't have to require local developers to provide for affordable housing or abide by the NPPF and so on. But it also means that when a developer, for example, chooses to build a two-story extension on top of a settled block of flats, in which inevitably there will be older people who have spent their lives in these sorts of dwellings, they find themselves actually not with any of the planning protections of objection. And in fact, in the regulations which are attached to the impact statement, it actually recognizes that many of these elderly people will actually be decanted from their homes in order to enable the developer to build. So there are two examples, I think, one of which is about the lack of incentives, and the other example is about something which is being done through the PDR system, which is of direct disbenefit to many elderly people.
Well, thanks, Kay, for those two very, very key questions. With respect to the planning bill and the approach that we want to take to engagement, The context of this, as you all know, is that very few people get involved in the planning process right now. When it comes to an individual planning application, something like 2 or maybe 3% of the local population become involved in that planning application. That falls to just 1% of the local population when local plans are under consideration. So very few people get involved. And what we want to do is to not make the new system less democratic. We want to make it more democratic by front-loading that engagement. And we think that by digitizing the planning system and requiring local authorities, communities, and other stakeholders as well, so it could be age concern, for example, locally in a particular place, would have a much greater say in the design of a local planning authority's community, where dwellings are to be built, what kind of dwellings they're going to be, what the infrastructure is going to be to support them, what they're going to look like, what the split between commercial or residential is going to be. It'll enable more people and more stakeholders to get involved at an earlier stage in the process and design a community for the benefit of the community, rather than having a piecemeal system, which we presently have, which doesn't involve many people at all, and which is very long and opaque to work through. So we think that the new approach that we're taking will immediately, and then even more so over time, engage many, many more people. You also mentioned PDRs and some of the challenges that may exist there. We reckon that since PDRs were introduced, I think about 5 years ago now, 6 years ago, something like 72,000 units, which wouldn't otherwise have been built, have been created as living spaces for local residents. We're going to introduce, as a result of the changes that we're making, the right of local authorities to charge SIL, or an infrastructure levy, on permitted development right changes. So there will be money accruing from those changed premises, or demolished and rebuilt premises, or built up premises, money accruing to the local authority for infrastructure purposes, which could be the provision of adaptable or affordable homes locally. So we anticipate, as a result of our changes, there'll be an opportunity for local authorities to accrue more cash. In terms of upbuilding, you specifically mentioned that. It is a requirement that local authorities, as part of their prior approval process, consult on the effect that an upbuilding proposal might have, and that consultation can result in requirements being laid upon the developers. But if you've got a specific example of where there has been a difficulty, a challenge, I'd be happy to have a look at it and see what we can do to try and make sure the system is working more effectively. I know I'm talking in the abstract, but if you can give me a specific example, then I'd be happy to look at it.
Thank you very much, Minister. I'd like to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other parliamentarians wanting to come in at this stage? I think that Lord Stoneham had a question earlier. Did Ben, are you out there amongst us?
I think Lord Stoneham's having difficulty getting in.
Oh, he's having difficulty. Well, perhaps Sally Greengrass. Sally, you'd like to put a question.
Thank you very much, Richard. I'd like to go back to the Minister, if I may, and the timescales that you were talking about earlier. I think we are in really a hurry. We need some announcement quickly, because the task force was meant to happen before the summer, and this could be a part of social care reform. And I think all of this is so urgently needed. Can the Minister elaborate a little more about how soon we can expect something to happen?
Thank you, Sally.
Well, I don't want to set any hairs running, Sally. I am very keen that in the next, I mean, we will have to go into purdah, as you'll appreciate, during April because of the local election campaign. But I hope that as we enter June, we can get the terms of reference finalised, we can get the membership finalised, and then we can make some announcements on it quite quickly. I am very keen that we set some ambitious timescales for the work that it does, so that we get some useful feedback as quickly as possible. Because be assured, I'm really interested in this particular area of social and economic activity, housing and construction policy. So I want to move as quickly as we can, but not so very quickly that we come a cropper with Her Majesty's Treasury, which, as I often have joked, and Richard heard me say this before, although not all good ideas start in the Treasury, all good ideas can end in the Treasury if the Treasury doesn't like them. So we've really got to make sure that we've got a good proposition to put to other departments.
Thank you. Now, Sue Adams from Care and Repair. Sue, can you unmute yourself and join in? If you can't, I'll read your question from the Q&A box.
Can you hear my voice?
We can.
Okay,
Sue.
thank you very much for this session, and it's a delight to listen to the Minister. The point that I wish to make and the question I'd like to pose is that 96% of older households are in the ordinary housing stock. And while some people do wish to move to specialist housing at some point in their lives, most don't. And so I wondered what the Minister's thoughts were on action to make the existing housing stock better places to live and age well healthily, and also his current thoughts on making all new homes good places to live at all ages. Thank you.
Well, it's a good question, Sue. You're quite right. Not everybody wants to move, nor should we try to insist that everybody moves. That certainly wouldn't be my intent. I hope you don't infer that from what I've said. I think a number of things. First of all, if I can just track back to the demand side incentives to encourage people, if they do wish to move. We've got to look at this in the round. I mean, people sometimes don't wish to move because they don't know what they're going to do with their dinner table. You know, I can't move to a better property because I've got a large dining table. That's what is the block to encouraging me to move. So we've got to try and find sensible ways of helping people think and be supported in the decisions that they make. In terms of those many people that will want to live in their existing homes, I think there are a number of considerations that the task force will need to make here, because of course this crosses a number of government departments. There is the social care element, which is the responsibility of DHSC. There is the issue of energy performance in those homes. Oftentimes, if you're more elderly, you're on a restricted income, potentially one of your biggest outgoings may not be a mortgage, if as it might be the case if you're younger, but it might be on your energy bill. And so we need to work closely with BAYS on measures to ensure that the housing stock is most effectively made less carbon inefficient. And I think the most carbon inefficient homes are homes in the private housing stock, not in the private rented sector or in the social rented sector. They're actually privately owned homes. So we've got to work with BAYS on that as well. So I think your question's a bit more broad ranging than the focus of MHCLG, but certainly it will be a focus, I think, of the task force.
Thank you very much. A question from Richard Morton, who chairs the Retirement Housing Group UK. Richard, can you unmute yourself?
Yes, can you hear me?
We can.
Yes, thank you, and good afternoon, Minister. There was a report in the Times this morning that new housing targets are causing widespread disquiet about impact on Greenbelt land.
Yeah.
And there was a report in yesterday's Guardian, I think, about how older people's housing is increasingly an urban town centre phenomenon. Would you agree that these two things together make policy support for older people's housing doubly desirable if it makes special provision for those who need it where it best suits them and frees up family housing in the countryside at the same time?
Well, I certainly agree that freeing up larger housing for families, which thereby frees up smaller housing at the start of the housing chain for first-time buyers, is a good thing. And getting people into appropriate accommodation when they want it and need it is the right thing to do. I don't want to dwell too much on where that might be, because I think that will be one of the things that we'll be considering in the work we'll be doing over the next several weeks and months. But I would say, with respect to the point you made at the top of your remarks about the front page story in the Times today, that the calculations that the Times journalists and the CPRE are making are at best inaccurate. What I mean by that is, what they are saying is that the local housing need of a local authority is defined as X, that the brownfield register is defined as Y, and therefore if X is greater than Y, Z has to be built on greenfield sites, not greenbelt sites, because greenbelt is protected and trumps everything, but on greenfield sites. Now, that supposes that local authority brownfield registers are all accurate and up to date. They are not. But local housing need as a number for a particular local authority is a starting point for building, not an end point. The number isn't binding. And many local authorities who have a local plan will have a target number of homes to be built each year, different from the local housing need number. And that's because they may have greenbelt constraints. They may have constraints like the fact that they're on the coast, and therefore, half of their constituency borders water and not land. So rather challenging to build in those sorts of places. So the methodology to come up with a need to build more on greenfield sites is inaccurate, and I think really is. It doesn't help debate because it's wrong.
Many thanks. Marjorie Broughton from East Surrey. Marjorie, unmute yourself, please.
Right. Good afternoon, Minister. I sort of asked a question about, in fact, it follows on from what you've just said about green belt. Because in East Surrey, we had an inspectorate, sort of planning inspector's inquiry, because there were plans afoot to build 400 houses, which is like a small town, on green belt, and some of it on floodplains. So at the moment, that the inspector found that it shouldn't go ahead. But in fact, my question really was, how can you ensure that local authorities will make enough provision for older people to have more specialised housing than make it, because we live in East Surrey, and make it just a London overspill for executives who will catch the train from Croydon and disappear up to their jobs in London. And I speak on behalf of EngageNet, which is a national older people's charity throughout England.
Thanks, Marjorie, for that. Well, in the first place, just to reassure you, and I mustn't talk about individual planning applications, that would get me into all sorts of difficulty. But more just broadly speaking, the Green Belt trumps everything, and National Planning Policy Framework and policy makes quite clear that Green Belt should only be used in extremis, and when all other options have been exhausted. So you should not be building on the green belt unless you absolutely have to and need to, and then there are other controls in place. With respect to how appropriate provision can be made by local planning authorities for elderly and elderly care living, I tend to think that the proposals that we've tabled for a much more strategic approach to plan making will enable local authorities to think much more holistically about the needs of their residents and future residents. And if you are able to design your planning authority community right up front, get more people, more stakeholders involved to design what needs to be built and where it's going to be, that is a much better system than the rather piecemeal system that we have presently. And consideration for older people or disabled people, adaptable living, is something that therefore local authorities can make and can specify as they build those plans. And that's what developers will know about and have to factor into their proposals as they come forward to make development proposals against those new strategically created plans. So I think it should help rather than hinder that sort of planning. But again, it's something which will, I think, usefully consider amongst the task force members that we will engage over the next several weeks.
Many thanks. Mark Tufnell. Mark is Deputy President of the CLA. Mark, your question, if we may.
Lord Best, thank you very much. And Minister, if I could ask you, please, to explain how the proposed reform to the planning system will help retiring farmers find appropriate accommodation which can suit their needs without being forced to leave the community in which they lived for many years, so that they wouldn't want to have to leave their farm to go into an urban setting. Mm-hmm. So we would like to see suitable development take place in a rural setting, either through permitted development rights as exist at the moment, or through rural exceptional sites, or to have to enable development in the proposed protection zones. And there I'm thinking of our concerns that I've written to you about the definition and the intention within a protected zone and what a local planning authority will envisage doing within it with regard to their local plan. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Mark. Thanks for that. Thanks for your letter, by the way. I've seen the draft letter that I'm sending back to you. I've made some amendments to it, and you either will have it now or you'll have it imminently. Clearly, we're still doing work on our final proposals, but what I can say to you is that the so-called protected zone is not designed to be a place where nothing can ever happen. I mean, you can, with very, very stringent controls, build in national development in parks. So there should be in places which are not growth or. What we are saying is existing planning should obtain, and I think that's one of the things that people miss in the consultation that we ran last year, that we are not, as it were, abolishing the existing system. We're simply creating a fast-track process for development to take place in designated areas, in places where local authorities so wish, or if developers or others come forward with a proposition that doesn't conform to the upfront rules that have been specified in those growth and renewal areas, a planning application will have to be submitted in the present way and considered in the present way. So if somebody who lives in a rural area and wishes to stay local, they would be able to submit subject to whatever the greenbelt considerations are, of course, be able to submit a planning application in the normal way to a local authority to develop somewhere which is closer to their existing home, and that would be considered on its merits in the present way. So I certainly envisage the opportunity for the sorts of people that you're talking about to live locally and stay locally and develop locally, subject to the existing rules.
Christopher, thank you very much indeed. We've come to the end of our session with you, and you've answered an awful lot of questions. We're most grateful. I think we take away that we've got you a bit too early, because there's important work coming down the pipeline. And I think we will, if we may, take you up on your offer to return to us perhaps in about 6 months' time, when there may be even more to say. But can I thank you very much indeed, and hand back to Peter for the second half of our programme.
Yes,
well, Richard, thank you very much for that. I'll run away now if you don't mind. But more power to your APPG's elbow. I'm sorry if you think I was a bit premature in coming to you at this point, but I'm always very keen to hear the sorts of things that you and your colleagues have got to say and have got to ask. And yes, I'd be very happy to come back in a few months' time as we've done some further work in this space to discuss it with you.
Chris, that is very, very good of you. And you made that offer without us having to ask for it, which is greatly appreciated. And I think I would just make one comment in the sort of 5 or so 6 years I've been co-chairing this APPG with Richard. I think we started off, we had a very good relationship with Gavin Barwell, and then he was no more. And then there was a conveyor belt of housing ministers who we had difficulties in engaging with at all because they moved on with such rapidity. But here's to your long life as housing minister. I suspect you will get some, you will get some sort of, it'll be challenging over the next few months, but very, very best of luck, and we look forward to seeing you in the autumn.
Thank you, Peter. I think that was a compliment. And so I shall quote Humphrey Bogart in Casablanca when he says, "Louis, this could be the beginning of a beautiful friendship." Cheerio.
On that note, very many thanks indeed, Chris.
Bye.
Yep. Well, that was the end. That's the end of our first session. The next session is how technology can improve older people's lives, and the APPG we're keen to explore the practical application of new technology in the homes for older people. We've got 3 presentations, and we're going to hear, we're going to watch and listen to them for those, and then there will be another Q&A session, which Richard will chair again. Our first presentation is from Professor Roy Sandbach. Roy is chair of the Inquiry into Technology for an Aging Population, and he is going to, the panel for innovation it's developing a benchmark for what good looks like in technology for housing and care. Roy was previously director of the National Innovation Centre for Aging at Newcastle University. And Roy, it's great to see you there, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you to you and Richard and the APPG for inviting me. You can all hear me, I assume. So wave to me if you think
and
you
indeed,
can.
Yep.
That's great, good. And it's great to be here. It's also pretty daunting because this is an area, housing, and I've just been listening to those questions, which were quite fascinating. I'll come back to them in a minute. This is an area that I'm totally an expert in. I am certainly chairing a panel which is doing some brilliant work in the context of technology for housing, and I'll let you know about that. However, I will not bring to bear any knowledge whatsoever with respect to housing planning or anything else that's been discussed in the past half an hour. What I will bring is I'll bring the challenge of someone with significant business background, some knowledge of aging, and there are several people on this call that I know and recognize well from the aging space, What I'll do is I'll give you a sneak preview of the work that we're doing in the context of the panel for technology and aging. Now, I should say, first of all, welcome to my kitchen in Scotland. It's lovely to have 80 people in the room. It's just absolutely fantastic. And it's great to share some perspectives from here. I have a personal interest. And I like to bring this very much to the personality. I'm 67. My mother is 92. And we both want to live better for longer. We have very different needs in the context of living better for longer. I mean, there are some fundamentals around independence and choice and social engagement and mobility and safety. And when you think about it, nearly all of these depend to a great extent on where we live and how we engage. Arguably, it's all about our housing. Certainly in my mother's case, she is still in the house that she bought when I was 7, which is exactly 60 years ago. And we must ensure that she lives better for longer through the use of every means that we can. And technology is key to that. And what I really want to do is I want to recruit you to the thinking that it isn't just about physical infrastructure, but it can be about physical infrastructure and the delighters that are brought through the use of technology into that physical infrastructure. Now, a little bit of background, because you have no idea who I am, and you've no idea, indeed, how I ever got involved in this. Well, I'm going to go back 12 years, and Richard ran something that I'm sure, is very proud of, and that is the Happy Panel. This was a panel designed to develop a set of housing design criteria for the delivery of housing for the aging population. Honestly, these have brilliantly stood the test of time, and I think that there's a huge awareness of them and a huge application of them across the sector, across all stakeholders. And what we've been trying to do in the past few months is to develop an equivalent set of criteria that relate to the use of technology for housing, and not just for older people, but for vulnerable people in general, because in very many ways, some of the questions that are asked with respect to vulnerability are questions which overlap hugely with those that relate to older people as well. And it was Housing Lynn and the Dunhill Medical Trust that initiated this new inquiry, and they came to me and asked me if I could be the independent chair. Now, what we have is a brilliant panel of experts and witnesses from every stakeholder community you could imagine that exists as the TAPPY panel. This is TAPPY as that was happy. And we've been working on this, and I've been doing my in-expert chairing. And what I want to do is I want to share some work in progress. Some of this might be challenging, particularly given some of the things that the minister has just said. First, we'd better get technology on our side, hadn't we? I mean, as Sue preempted me in the questions, we are going to have around 6 million more people over 65 by 2040. That's an easy number to say, 6 million. Right, okay, what is that? Well, that's 10 cities the size of Leeds. We're going to have 10 cities worth the size of Leeds, more people over 65 by 2040. And that's not just the absolute. The absolute is 20 million people. 20 million people, a quarter of the population by 2040 will be over 65. And as the minister said, we'll have 3 million over 85. These are huge numbers. And where will they live? Well, as Sue said in her note, 90% of them live in mainstream housing. In fact, they live in a third of all housing. The critical thing is that 80% of more than 80% of housing that will exist in 2040, it already exists. So I understand, and I was very interested in all of the conversations around new housing, but let's just get this straight. The existing housing stock must be the baseline challenge, is Roy's view. It's the baseline challenge. And in the context of that baseline challenge, we should be looking at technology in the context of monitoring, diagnostics, engagement, mobility, energy, safety, security. And are we? Well, my personal view is right now, and actually the view from many of the witnesses that have come to the panel, is that we're not well structured and we're not working at maximum capacity to build that technology into that housing base. So let me give you some snapshots of what we've learned. By the way, what I'm really saying here is that we need housing and technology dovetailed as the living platform for better and longer lives. Let's just think about that. It's a living platform for better and longer lives. What have we been learning? Well, in our very first meeting, Clinton Farquharson said, technology should enable me to live the life I want and to do the things that are important to me. If we just keep that as the sort of lighthouse here. Technology should enable me to live the life I want. Now, everyone, from the wonderful occupational therapists that we've had in the groups, to social housing people, through to technology developers, they're telling us that we simply do not get the end user involved enough in defining what technological usage could be in their houses. They don't co-create solutions often enough. Now, this isn't easy. And I speak as a businessman that has worked with many, many consumer groups over the years, because the over 65 group is not heterogeneous. It's probably the least heterogeneous group that you could imagine, but it must be done. We must get end users engaged effectively. In addition, as soon as you get over 65, you don't suddenly become totally removed from wanting beautiful design. Beautiful design and creative design is essential in order to get this population of over 65s on our side with respect to engagement with technology. Being older doesn't remove that desire. Commoditizing services and products isn't enough. It's not good enough. Personalization counts. And that's one thing that I agree with in the context of developing older people's housing and indeed services. And then finally, I would say that we need to create a technology marketplace for people, for individuals, for carers and providers. And we don't really have one of those. Now, older people are capable. 94% of households have the internet, and 94% of households with an over 65 individual in them have the internet. 70% of over 65s use the web daily. Just to reflect on that. We're not talking about non-savvy people here. We've learned a great deal on practicalities. One of them, we need to change the culture of just doing the minimum compliance build. I'm sure there are many people on the call who understand what that really means, but there's a sense that we try to get by with the minimum. And what we're trying to do in TAPI is give you guidance on technology application, which will not be just the minimum. We also heard about interoperability of technology platforms and the need for that to be really, really well considered, and the siloed nature of the whole sector. We just cannot allow this to continue if we're going to deliver living better for longer. Finally, and I think this was an interesting piece of learning, there was a dynamic discussion in the panel so far about the importance of building technology, learning and understanding into training curricula for the range of engaged professionals. Housing, planning through to health and care professionals, all of them. Now, if we do this, we'll get to win-win for everybody. Government savings in health and care costs, business opportunities in housing tech, and older people having more fulfilled lives. I hope I've recruited you. we'll all be there eventually, so I'd better have recruited you. And thank you, Peter, for your time. And
Very
any
many
questions,
thanks.
by the way, any questions, just shout them out as we go through the Q&A.
That's great. Many thanks for setting the scene there, Roy, so well. That's really appreciated. Our next presentation is from Gary Jones and Orit Eyal-Fibeesh of Sparco TV. Gary is the development manager at Sparco. He has a long career in the voluntary sector, having been CEO of Age Concern UK, operating in multiple London boroughs, and he's previously worked frontline with older people in London. He's also helped establish UK's largest LGBTQ+ older people's charity, Opening Doors London, of which APPG member Baroness Liz Barker is a patron. Orit is the CEO of Sparco, having been the managing director of multiple innovative logistics and tech organizations across Europe and the Far East. She has a particular interest in older people, loneliness, isolation, and digital exclusion, so works at Sparco to provide a digital solution for older people who are at risk of loneliness and isolation due to digital exclusion. Gary and Orit, it's great to see you both there, and from my perspective, I look forward to learning a great deal more about Sparco. Over to you.
Thank you, Peter. Can everyone hear me? I'm going to say a few words of introduction and then pass over to Orit. Good afternoon, APPG members and housing and care professionals and members of the public. I'm pleased to be here today on behalf of the company Sparco TV, for which I work part-time. As was said, I've worked for local Age UK and Age Concern organisations in London across nearly 40 years now. Sparco is a UK company working in collaboration with housing associations, local Age UKs and a Fortis charity. And Sparco is seeking other partner organisations in order to roll out across the country. We support older people's connectivity via the television, rather unusually, their connectivity with each other, with services and with their family and friends. Sparco enables older people to make choices on services, whether out in the community, encouraging people to go out, or bringing services to them in their home if they're less mobile. It also enables them to make video calls as well. It's a powerful tool also for charities and housing associations to communicate with their beneficiaries and to support their beneficiaries. Indeed, I'd have loved such a tool when running a local charity. I'm now going to pass on to Orit, Sparco's CEO, and she'll explain more about how Sparco works and the choices it offers older people and organisations, and about Sparco's journey. Orit.
Orit, are you there?
Need to unmute.
Can you hear me now?
We
Yes.
can indeed. Yep, that's great.
Can you also see the presentation, the slides?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can. Yep.
Okay. So thank you, Gary, for the introduction. Thank you, Mr. Aldous and Lord Best, for the opportunity to join you today. And also thank you, Professor Sandbach, for setting the scene. Sparco is a tech-based solution aimed at tackling loneliness and isolation in older people. It provides a unique combination of easy-to-use technology with a human element, promoting connectedness, social confidence, fulfillment, and overall improved well-being. Last April, the Select Committee on COVID-19 published a report under the name of Beyond Digital, scrapping the digital-only approach and planning for a hybrid world, where they recommend that government should focus not only on the digital strategy, but instead a hybrid approach, a mix of online and offline aspects of life. The committee recommended that government should introduce the legal right to internet access and digital infrastructure, and warns of a real risk that any increasing reliance on digital technology only will exacerbate existing inequalities. Sparko provides exactly this hybrid mix of online and offline elements in a way that enables older people to benefit from the technology on which many of us have been so reliant during the pandemic. Sparko was designed as a technology that works on a TV, any TV. And this is because research shows that the TV is the piece of technology that most older people are most comfortable with. No usernames, PIN numbers, passwords, antiviruses, just a remote on a good old TV. This ensures that we are able to reach the most digitally excluded older people. We're not talking about older people who may need some support with their devices, learning an email or Skype. We're talking about older people who cannot and will not ever get digital. Sparko uses a set-top box that plugs into the TV and a simple remote control to switch between regular TV and the Sparko channel. From the home screen, people can select which feature they want to access. We work in partnership with large organizations, with a range of organizations, including third aid charity organizations like APPG, housing associations, veterans, and council services to provide a wide variety of services, including life and health, social activities, exercise classes, social meetups, tailored content and services applicable to a community, for example, information and advice on specific age UKs or an NHS talk, library sessions, social meetups with other members of the community, or even in a supported living block. Video calls with friends and family, messaging features that can assist people with reminders for medication, important dates, etc. Lifelong learning, educational opportunities, local community engagement and signposting, and probably the most important, social prescribing. We also encourage people to share their skills and contribute to the content or learning opportunities. We are all people, we have a story to tell, whether it's a fascinating career background or a personal interest that we can share with other members. For example, a local history talk or a skill such as crochet or art. We provide ongoing technical support as well as a community engagement manager who, along with their team, ensures that all people have regular human contact. Members connect with each other through the TV, and as a service, and as the services are locally based, they often continue their connections offline in person. As we are actively seeking to improve our members' well-being, Sparko also provides outdoor sessions, especially as COVID restrictions are lifted, ensuring members have the opportunity to connect offline if they so choose. Sparko provides older people with choices and opportunities. They get to decide what they want to do, what they want to get involved with at a time that suits them, with a content and a variety to meet their individual interests. We also see benefits for carers of older people, freeing up their time to concentrate on doing the work that they are best at, caring. For those older members who are cared for by family members, Sparko offers a much needed solution, enabling time spent together to be quality time. The monthly cost of Sparko is approximately half the hourly cost of a carer. It therefore is an affordable option for many and represents real value for money for organizations looking to promote the well-being of their members. We also see a real preventative value. Sparko helps to keep people physically fit and their minds active, engaged in their communities with meaningful social connections. This not only has a positive impact on health and social care services, but a huge benefit to older people and to society as a whole. We will be happy to take questions and to organize live demos for all those who would like to. And with this, I will finish my session. Thank you for your time today.
Many, and I have to say that is an incredibly impressive partners, which much points the way for the future. So very many thanks to you both for that presentation. And our final presentation is from Helen Balles. Helen is the policy director at BT. She's responsible for content and services, and in the role she works on digital inclusion and consumer fairness. And through the pandemic, she has led BT's efforts to work with government to support vulnerable customers and citizens. It's great to see you there, Helen, and we look forward to receiving your presentation.
Hi, so I'm going to give the screen share a go. Bear with me. Ooh. Can you see some slides?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I'm in the middle though. I'm going to try to go back up to the top. Hold on. Can you see a nice purple slide?
Yes, we can.
So there we go. That's the beginning. So I'm not the only policy director at BT. There's a couple of us with different specialisms, but as you outlined there, Peter, this is the area that I cover. And actually through this year, there's been a real sort of coming together of a few different topics for me. So these kind of questions around customer connectivity, customer needs, and another policy area that I cover around content, TV distribution, and where is that going, which actually I think fits very well with what we just heard from Sparko. So let me just outline how we see that all fitting together. So, I mean, particularly really thinking about the connectivity side of enabling people and older people to use technology. I think that's really where we see BT's role. So that topic of digital inclusion that's really, we've been thinking about it a long time, but it's really come to the fore, as I think it really needed to, as an urgent policy area in this year, and lots of thought now in how there's different aspects to it and how they might fit together. So this is kind of roughly the way that we see it, that really to enable digital inclusion, there are 4 different aspects. There's infrastructure. Can you actually be connected and be online? Is it available to you? There's connectivity. Are you connected? Then there's devices. Have you got a device? And can you use it? And then bleeding into the skills and motivation, do you actually use it? Do you know how to, such that you can, and that then you're doing some stuff that works for you in your life? And so we have some engagement with all 4 of these, but really see our role in the top 2. We're an infrastructure company. And as many of you will know, there's been a lot of policy focus on how do we improve both the quality and the reach of infrastructure. And that's something that BT is always focused on. Made some announcement recently about how we're seeking to go further in terms of our fibre rollout in the next few years. But broadly, it's not complete. There's still lots of efforts with government on trying to reach those final few percent with decent broadband. But progress there is good. The coverage there is really now starting to reach up to 97, 98% of premises, which is pretty good. Equivalent, if you like, to the TV broadcast coverage. So always more to be done, but improving, starting to kind of reach a baseline of good enough, we think. And then connectivity, there's scattered through these slides I've got, there's quite a few different stats, because it slightly depends which study you look at and what they're measuring. So as Roy mentioned, access to the internet is pretty high, but when you start to drill down into that number of households that have fixed connectivity, which is really, it's what we all have, right? It's what we're using now. If you want to have good connectivity, for most people, that means fixed broadband. That is not quite as high. And we definitely think that there is more to be done there. And we'll come on in a minute to sort of the different drivers there. But some access is pretty high. And that's mostly because the cohort that haven't got fixed have probably now got a smartphone. And through that route, they have some connectivity. So there's been a lot of attention this year on who's not included and what's going on with them. And I think our take is that roughly breaks down into these three different groups. The biggest group that are not online is by far and away the kind of number one characteristic is older people. So notwithstanding Rory's stats about the numbers of older people who are online, and there are lots, and they're very active, and they're, you know, streaming and getting online deals and all the stuff that we all do. But I think in some ways, I think I'm starting to really see that group, the over 65s, if you like, as kind of split. They feel quite 50-50 to me. And that there's a group that are online and are making it work for them, and there's a group that are not, and therefore are missing out on many things. And the question for us as a society is, how can we support that group to start to come into this world, which more and more is where we're just running the basics of our lives, right? As we just found through the pandemic. So there's still about 2.5 million households in the UK that don't have fixed broadband. A good 90% of them are over the age of 65. And as you look into the, say, the ONS stats on this, as I spend some quality time doing, the older up the cohorts you go, the higher proportion there are of people not online. So once you get to the over 75s, a good 50% of them are not online. There are some affordability issues, and there's been a lot of interest in that through the pandemic, particularly focuses on families that are not online. But honestly, that is a much smaller group. And I think one of the insights that's important to keep on mind is the group that are not online, for whom lower prices is going to bring them online, is pretty small. Generally, there is, say, in that group of older people not online, some that have a cost issue. But even once we fix the cost issue, and you might have seen that BT announced a couple of weeks ago that we are relaunching our social tariff, so a low cost for broadband, with a much broader eligibility, and it will be a fibre-based product. So similar to the standard broadband that we all buy, but it'll be £15 a month for any household on universal credit, and also any pensioner on the guaranteed credit element of pension credit. So that should contribute to solving this. But I think what we've understood is for those on low incomes, it being affordable is necessary, but it's not sufficient to drawing them into a kind of active use of broadband at home. And so, and I think I've talked to some of this already, but we really, and related to some of the things we did with the government through the pandemic, I think we really came to understand how this can have impacts in the real world. So when we were talking with government last spring around how can the telecoms industry help that group 1.4 million most vulnerable to COVID, NHSX told us that their estimate was half that group didn't have broadband at home. That's a massive group. We also did a bit of work with NHSX talking about care homes, and they had some similarly sort of amazing stats there around the number of care homes that didn't have broadband. That seemed, I can't quite remember what they were, but I think again it might have been in the 50% sort of range, which seems surprising to us. But the response from NHSX was that some care homes really are the last bastion of the facts. So there's clearly a lot to do here in terms of.
You make yourself a cup of tea if you want one. No, thank you, not for me, but.
And so, as I said, there's some, you know, immediate things that we're working on there in terms of making connectivity more affordable. But we have a much longer range set of ideas that we're starting to talk through with government and Ofcom. So I wanted to just give you a quick overview of them. And that is basically this. So you may be aware that at the minute, both Ofcom and the government are running reviews into public sector broadcasting. And so they're looking somewhat into the future. The Ofcom time horizon is about 5 years. Government one hasn't been so specific. But our view is now's the time to really start to think about that sector and think about how it fits with wider society. And we really think that a long-term view about distribution of TV could be, should be, the vehicle for inclusive digital distribution in the UK. And that kind of, the sort of logic of this goes roughly like this. The PSBs have got a set of challenges that face them as a sector and an industry, which is already putting them in a fairly precarious position. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And then the government has its priorities and ambitions that we're working with them on in terms of building out networks, building out particularly fibre networks, getting them to go further while also upgrading them, but really seeking to get the private market to fund the vast majority of that. And then as we're talking about today, there's a question around how do we really start to reach and draw in those cohorts of society that haven't so far chosen to use the digital world, and how do we get them into maybe not necessarily the open internet and sort of trading funny cat videos, but IP connectivity in their home so that they can use the services that they need, stay in touch with their family, be supported to live independently for longer. And there's pressing public policy reasons to do that last one, because really of the sort of exponential growth that we face in terms of a group of older people needing healthcare support, social care support, but also wanting to live independent lives for as long as they possibly can. So just to look quickly through these points. So the existing broadcast technology that we're all familiar with of an aerial on our houses that is then beamed out, actually some of it from BT Tower, has been brilliant, has worked really well for 50, 60, 70 years. But as you'll all know, viewers are moving online. And as that happens, and that's something that's really been accelerated by the pandemic, a tipping point is coming for that industry, because broadcast is fixed cost economics. It costs what it costs. So while you've got loads of viewers on it, it's pretty cost effective. But as those viewer numbers drop, it becomes more and more expensive for the viewers that are left. So there's a sort of inherent crunch point coming in that industry where those costs are going to be unsustainable. On top of that, viewers are moving because the online experience is better. It's more convenient for them. It is starting to enable better quality. It's starting to enable more choice. Say when you're watching live sport, you can choose your camera angle. So this didn't used to be the case, but I think in the last, say, 5 years, the experience of watching on demand, as you can with Netflix or Amazon or BT Sport, really is better and superior to broadcast technology. So something is going to have to happen there. And our take is that that could be a vehicle, not just for thinking about the PSBs as they are and broadcast and TV as it is, but to have a switchover program, a bit like the analog to digital switchover program that took place in the 2000s, which intervenes in those households that haven't got an IP connection to get them to an IP connected TV, as Sparko are starting to do. And from the point of view of TV, potentially for that age group, it doesn't look that different to them. But the transformation you've taken those households through is that that cohort of about 10% of households that currently don't have IP connectivity now do. And with that, that is then the gateway to enabling healthcare support, social care support, social support, without them necessarily needing to buy into the idea that they're now on the internet. Potentially you can run those services, as Sparko has shown, through the technology that everyone is familiar with, their TV. And it then enables a digitization of public services that at the minute is facing a barrier because a big group of users can't access that digitally. So, I mean, this for us is we're starting to talk about this with government and Ofcom now, thinking of a time horizon of about 10 years. Maybe longer. I think we reckon that the earliest you could possibly start to do this would be late 2020s. But a switchover program itself would probably take several years. The last one was, I think, 7 years from beginning to end. But if you're going to do that, then you need to start planning now. You need to start thinking about how it would work, what the responsibilities would be, where the costs would lie. There's various bits of legislation that need to get changed. All of that takes time. And so our take is that government and Ofcom should start planning for that, for all of the reasons that we've discussed today. And they need to sketch out what the new model for PSBs would be. They need to think about the terms and obligations for IP distribution to make it affordable for everybody, to make it decent quality for everybody, to pick up that final group of households that won't do this if you just wait for the market to bring them along. Well, they're certainly not going to do it fast enough. But if you think about all of that, then it provides a way to get a baseline of IP connectivity that is affordable to every household. And then from that, you can supply the services that they need to enable them to use technology to improve the quality of their lives. So it's the beginning of a discussion for us, but one that we feel has a lot of potential, we think, for starting to work on some of the issues we talked about today.
And very, very many thanks for that. That's much appreciated. And I think now we've got a short time for Q&A, which I'll hand over to Richard on. I may have to leave a few minutes early now because I have to go to another meeting, but I think both sessions have been extremely illuminating, and very many thanks to our speakers. And over to you, Richard, to conduct the Q&A.
Well, thank you, Peter. If you've got to slip away, please do. Many thanks for chairing this and for your support throughout for all the APPG activities. Many thanks indeed. So very little time left for questions. I'm going to ask parliamentarians if any would wish to go first, it being an all-party parliamentary group, but perhaps I just have a quickie, a couple of one-liners. What does Sparko cost the consumer?
Right. Yes, Sparko is primarily a subscription model, but there is a one-off cost for the kit. So the kit is £189, and the monthly subscription is £15 per month.
Okay, thank you for that one-liner. One other one, perhaps, to you and to Gary. Do you envisage, as we all who are relatively literate, relatively numerate, relatively able to handle the technology, do you think that you'll gradually go out of business as we don't need to work through our televisions because we are able to cope on our own? Are you filling a gap in time which will come to an end, I don't know, a decade from now?
If I could come in here, possibly, but then technologies are converging in lots of ways. And I think, as Helen says, it's a way to get, if you like, the current generation of refuseniks, some of the population of older people, more involved digitally. And maybe they'll get the confidence to use the wider functionality down the line. Adding to what Helen said, and she may wish to comment on it, I think there's an analog phone switch off in 2025, and that's all the more reason to jump ahead with digital solutions as well. Indeed, housing associations and community alarm providers have had to think ahead and move from analog-based phone alarm schemes to other solutions.
Thank you very much, Gary. Just Helen.
If I can add maybe, if I can add a comment or two, please. The decision to develop Sparko on the TV, it's a matter of choice. It would have been easier to develop Sparko as an app on a tablet or a smartphone, and it can still be done in the future if there is a need for that. So we made a conscious decision, and a costly one in terms of time and complexity, to develop it on the TV for now, because we felt this is the most appropriate. Also, I think, and that sounds a bit like a sales pitch, and I apologize for this, but the uniqueness of our solution is that it is a combination of a tech solution and a human touch. So we are not just a tech solution. The technology is the enabler for the whole of the community.
That's a very good point. Many thanks. Time has run out on us. I'd just say to Helen, many thanks for the BT work that you're doing. I think there's very little knowledge in the world outside that very special tariff is available to people on pension credit, which would save them a fortune every month.
It's not everyone on pension credit. It's the guaranteed income bit of pension credit. So it's a significant cohort, but it's not everybody on pension credit. It's the lower income people who are eligible for pension credit.
Right, so you're a little bit mean there, but just the same, there are a lot of people who would benefit and who I suspect don't really know that this opportunity exists to get a very good deal from BT. So I just end with the plea that you publicise the good work you're doing there for that group. And of course, housing associations and councils who have housing stock can publicise on your behalf if they know what their residents could be accessing, but probably aren't. Well, yeah. Can I thank the four of you, back to Roy as well, very much indeed for filling our second half of our program so admirably. Can I thank everybody for joining in? We've still got 50 participants at the end of a long session, which is great. Lovely to have everybody with us. Special thanks to my parliamentary colleagues. And we'll see you perhaps when we see the Minister again in the autumn. So many thanks for being with us. All the best.
Thank you.
A pleasure. Bye.